Welcome back, everyone. So in the last video, we talked about jobs being a unit of work and how job servers aim to actually perform these jobs. So jobs being just different types of application work that is done in the background independent of the user's interaction or even the user's knowledge. So we talked about job servers and we need to talk about job queues. So job queues is essentially a way for us to understand how these job servers know when to perform these job work. So in order for us to understand that, as far as our discussion about what is considered a job goes, in our specific example, I'm going to define a job as our job server reaching out to any single of these data sources, fetching it, and then storing it in the database. So here we can see that going to our single news outlet, this is considered job 1. So a job. Our server requests from the news and then it updates the database. This news could be any news, BBC, Fox News, CBS. I'm not too familiar with all of the different news outlets, but you can just see them as individual outlets. That is one job. Same thing with any of these magazine outlets. Maybe we reach out to Vogue and that is considered another separate singular job. Same thing with the blogs. I really don't know any blogs, but you can imagine that reaching out to that one blog and then getting any of the latest posts and then updating it in the database is job 3, another singular job. Now that we've understood what these jobs are, again, the reason why I say they're singular sources is because there can be so many different outlets for news, for magazines, for blogs. There are hundreds of thousands of them. And reaching out to each of them individually is considered one job. I'm not saying reaching out to all of your news is one job. I'm saying in our specific example, just reaching out to one of them and getting the latest posts or the new posts and then storing them in our database, that is considered a job. Now, the job queue. What is a queue? So if you have done data structures and algorithms, you will have learned what a queue is. We have, of course, those courses. And you can take them and learn about queues. So if you're familiar with a queue, you know what it is. But for those of you that are not, let's go over the basics of a queue. A queue is essentially very similar to this concept of a queue in the UK. It's pretty much a line. So you can imagine that there is some kind of bouncer or doorman that is guarding the entrance into some kind of event. When you queue up, you start lining up. People come and line up in front of the queue. And the whole idea here is that the order matters. We want to say that the first person in is going to be the first person out. So the first person that comes is the first person that gets to go in. There is a line here. So the order you can see beneath 1, 2, and 3. And this will be the order in which they go through the line. The order that you arrived is the order that you go through. Very simple here. The only difference now, instead of people, I want you to see these as jobs. So whatever jobs got queued or whatever jobs came first is going to be the jobs that go through to get processed by the job server. So here, of course, with the same order, the news came first and then the magazine and then the blog. So now that will, of course, be the order that they get sent into the job server for the job server to do. Now, that is a basic queue. There is also something called a priority queue. A priority queue instead has 2 rules now. Things come in with a certain priority. This could be just a number that is weighted, so it could just be an increasing order. The higher the priority, you want to prioritize doing that job regardless versus anything of lower priority. And after that, we still follow the first in, first out rule. So here, let's say we have our news. This news that comes in as a job has a P2, a priority of 2. But then there's this magazine that comes in, this magazine job, and it has a P1, so a priority of 1. And then we have the blog come in, and this has a priority of 2. Now here, if we were to follow the steps that we need with our priority queue, what is going to be the first thing that we need to process, the first job? Well, following our rules, what is rule number 1? We want to make sure that we push higher priority more than lower priority. So looking at our 3 jobs, P1 has the highest priority versus anything else. So again, I'm going to say that 1 is greater than 2, greater than 3. So pretty much we'll go by Olympic rules of who wins, right? So first place, second place, third place. So P1 has a higher priority or a greater priority. So of course, because it is the greatest priority of all of our jobs, then we're going to place that as priority 1, and therefore it is the first thing that needs to go. Then we're going to process the next 2. So because the remaining are equal priority, we're now going to then do our second rule, first in, first out, as we saw with the regular queue. Now, because we've already established the position of the magazine, we don't need to worry about that. We just need to worry about our P2s. So which of the 2 came first? Well, the news one did. So that is going to have a higher order than the blog. So then now that we've figured out the actual news, we have the last remaining one, which is going to be the third order. So here, now that we walk through the steps, we have our order. It is 2, 1, 3. So when it's time to actually move things into the job server, well, our magazine is going to be first, then our news second, and then our blog third. So that becomes the priority queue. So again, that's the difference between a queue and a priority queue. With a regular queue, you follow first in, first out. With a priority queue, you weight it first, figure out the highest weight first, and then of the things in the same weight, you just follow first in, first out. And that's pretty much all we need to know about queues for now at a high level. We'll talk more about technologies that represent queues in a later video when we do a deeper dive into queues. But as far as we're concerned now, this is all they represent at the high level in our diagram. So we've learned about job queues. Now, I mentioned earlier that something has to be able to actually send the jobs into the job queue, because what is giving our queue the actual jobs it needs to do? This is where we come back to web servers. So I know I mentioned earlier that web servers are really driven by user behavior. You can kind of see sometimes that web servers might not always be driven by user behavior. They might also house some application logic, not just business logic, in the sense that a web server can be the thing that actually queues and figures out when to actually start setting up these jobs at some point. So if you've ever worked with anything like a cron job is a good example. Cron jobs are just jobs that run based on your commands for it at some point. So maybe, for example, we do and run this command every day at 12:01 a.m. We queue up our jobs then because that's when we know we'll have the newest, latest job posts for the new day. That might be an example of a cron job. That cron job could be set up on your web server. So your web server's whole purpose is to send these jobs into the job queue. However that happens, that is up to your actual web server code itself. But this whole thing is how the web server is connected to the job queue. And that's pretty much the relationship. So it could be web servers, it could be application servers. Again, we're splitting hairs here, but the main idea is just that you need something to send these jobs into the job queue. And that's that connection right now that we have between our web servers and then this leg of the job piece of our system. We'll dive into more of this when we look into deeper examples, but hopefully you at least understand how jobs work and how we have separate servers that pretty much handle the behavior of figuring that out. So there we go. We've understood jobs, we've understood queues, we've understood job servers. Now let's move on to the rest of this diagram. I'll see you in the next video.